Atlanta treating everyone well? Any Atlanta people here? Nice. I'm sure we have people. I have been talking to people from all over the planet, which is one of the things I love most about Tech Ed. It's fun. It makes the world seem a little bit smaller, and it makes me realize how much how important some of these technologies are to you all and your businesses and how things run. And so I get the pleasure of introducing a topic or talking about a topic, which is how to use application virtualization in your RDS and your VDI environments, which is going to be a hoot. How many of you all are using AppV already? It's about 50% of the room. How many of you have never heard of AppV? One, so you might be in the wrong room. There's a Connect station down the hall, I think, somewhere. And how many of you who are using AppV are actually using it in a VDI/RDS environment already? Great. Hopefully I won't bore you to death with my questions, but I always want to get as much information from you all to bring back to the engineering team that I can. I find these shows incredibly valuable. So as we think about the future, as we've planned for the future and we build for the future, it's always good to get direct feedback from customers, how they're using it, what the problems they face are, all that stuff. So bring it on. I love feedback. I have 4 very cool 4 gig USB key phone charger deals to give people with the best questions and best feedback, so don't be shy. You know you want one. It says Windows 7 on it. Is that really the view from my office? Actually, I'm Kevin Sullivan. I'm a principal program manager at Microsoft. I've been with the company for just about 5 years. I joined Microsoft through the acquisition of a company called Desktop Standard. Has anyone heard of Desktop Standard? Are you a fan? If you're a fan, raise your hand. I have been referred to occasionally as the group policy guy. I am trying to shed that moniker. I've been working with the group policy team and running the program management team for group policy and advanced group policy management, Windows Intune, and various sundry other pieces of technology for the past many years. My wife told me last July that she wanted to go home, and home is Boston, so we made that happen. And I joined the application virtualization team, which has to have the coolest office in the New England area, I think. I'm a big fan. Come visit. Any of you all been to Boston? Those of you who have been to Boston know that we're not in Boston. We're actually in Cambridge, and that is Boston. We're looking at from across the river. I actually went to college in that neighborhood over there. I'll give you a little bit about my background. I have a past life as a musician. I studied music and jazz composition at a place called Berklee College of Music, which is an amazingly great institute for training people to become engineers at Microsoft, shockingly enough. But I've been a musician my whole life, played a lot of music and wrote a lot of music, and realized at one point I really wanted to be a capitalist that got to bed at a reasonable hour. I had a career change, and I got into technology about 20 years ago. I started working for IBM, did a lot of early, you guys remember Hermes? How many SMS folks in the house? How many SCCM folks? So it was part of a Hermes deployment project, pre-1.0. You can imagine how much fun that was. Got really involved in Active Directory and Active Directory design, and really focused on change and configuration management and AD deployments and design. Worked for a few different startups. I was lucky enough to work with some brilliant developers at a small company called Alita Software. Alita Software, we built a lot of migration technologies, and some of the things you're probably familiar with today, we were acquired by a company called Quest Software. They're downstairs. I'm sure you guys are aware of Quest. And a lot of their migration tools and some of their AD management tools, which I was involved with, are part of the Quest suite now, which is fantastic. And then after a few other moves, I ended up at Desktop Standard, which brought me out to Seattle to work with Microsoft on some group policy stuff. So crazy enough, I'm now back looking at my alma mater, still not playing music, but that's all right. How many of you all have MDOP, the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack? Left side of the room, you guys got to like raise more hands. Lie a little bit because we're being way out balanced over here. MDOP is obviously one of the key ways that you're going to acquire application virtualization. AppV is one of the cornerstones of this suite that was really put together to really help enhance the value of your software assurance. It's one of many pieces, and all these pieces individually have a ton of value that they provide. And I just wanted to give you a rundown real quick, because if you're not familiar with them, some of them are pretty interesting, and you might want to check them out. If you already have MDOP, you are probably aware that you own all of these products, or you have rights to all of these products, and you may or may not know about them. So the first one is actually very interesting in a strategic sense, because Asset Inventory Service is one of the first enterprise management services that we've launched in a Microsoft-hosted cloud. That product gives you the ability to keep track of all of your software assets. They announced 2.0 today. 2.0 actually has some hardware reports and some additional value that they provide through AIS. It's a pretty great product, and it actually is a part of a service that we just released called Windows Intune. How many of you all are familiar with Windows Intune? I worked on Windows Intune for the last 3 years. It is pretty cool stuff, and it's super strategic, and it's really paving the way for a new sort of wave of IT management, hosted IT management through the cloud. And as you all have probably realized through our ad campaign and pretty much every other technology company, it's all about the cloud. To the cloud. We're all in. So Windows Intune and AIS sort of harmoniously live together. DART, the Diagnostic and Recovery Toolkit, this was a piece that came through an acquisition of Winternals. Mark Rasinovich, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, is a brilliant, brilliant technical fellow at Microsoft, and he developed this product a long time ago, and it's all about recovering of your Windows machines. Desktop error monitoring is an in-house built solution to sort of call all of your error logs, Watson, and different data so that you can do diagnostics quicker. AGPM is near and dear to my heart. That is a group policy-based solution to add change management, source control type experience to your group policy environment. I've been a part of that product since we first started drawing the picture on a bar napkin in Vancouver many years ago. And it's come a long way. It's a really neat product, and it really solves some today problems, which is fun. And then the last one is MEDV, Microsoft Enterprise Desktop Virtualization, and that's very much in line with the AbbVie as far as the Microsoft virtualization story is concerned, but it's really more focused on virtualizing the desktop as opposed to virtualizing the application. So quick rundown of MDOP. Obviously, in case you didn't notice, the top of the list is application virtualization. That must mean this is in priority order, and that's the most important piece of the puzzle. That's what I was told to say. It's my story. I'm sticking to it. AbbVie is very, very cool stuff. Actually, some of you have said that you're using it currently. Has anyone heard of Server AbbVie, Server Application Virtualization? Great. We have a couple of my colleagues are here today to answer all the hard questions. I'll take the easy ones, but I have two folks over here who are way smarter than me. But Derek is one of the program managers on Server AbbVie. And Ben is one of our developers on AbbVie, and they have a ton of intellectual power between the two of them, so they'll help me with questions, hopefully, if they don't run out of the room screaming by the time I'm done. The core to application virtualization is very different than, virtualization of machines and VDI and Hyper-V and all that fun stuff. It's about isolation of the application. It's about making sure that conflicts between the app and the OS disappear. It's about ensuring that all the resources that an application needs to run are packaged together in sort of a single environment so that it's separated from the operating system. It makes it much more portable, makes it easier to manage, move in and out. And this presentation is not about all the different aspects of AppV. If you find yourself with a time machine and can go back a couple hours, another colleague of ours just did a presentation on the sequencer. Did anyone go to his session? Hopefully it was really good. Derek did a session on server AppV today, which went very well. And then Ben is giving a session tomorrow on AppV as well. So there's a lot of us around. We'll be down at the booth. Anyway, isolation is pretty key. Also, the delivery mechanism of managing these virtualized packages and delivering these virtualized packages out to your enterprise through different mechanisms is very important. And it's the fact that you have this isolated package or this independent unit, this artifact to deploy, it makes it much simpler. There's not a lot of coordination with the operating system to get the stuff down. And then, of course, centralized management. And this is going to come in different flavors for a lot of different folks. Is anyone using AppV in an SCCM environment today? Is anyone using AppV in another ESD, electronic software distribution, or environment other than SCCM? And how many are you are? Can you tell me which one? Very cool. I like you a lot. He said they deploy with group policy preferences, which is cool. That's one of my old products, so I like that. The beauty of this app virtualization environment is it really doesn't matter what your distribution mechanism is. You should be able to plug this in. And I'm going to show you some of the command line capabilities of the product that sort of help you do that if you're trying to customize your own solutions. How many of you are using it through terminal services and through RDS? One. Okay. And hopefully by the end of this, some more of you will be inspired to do that because there's some pretty brilliant sort of aspects to it. So for the session, we're going to talk about three things. And I have to tell you, these three things conceptually are very simple. And I am sure for at least my understanding and my experience with tech ed attendees, you guys are all over these three core concepts. They are not, however, super easy to implement. So my goal is to try and convey the simplicity of managing virtualized applications in an RDS environment, a VDI environment, and I'm going to walk through the steps. But I want to set expectations that I'm not going to show you this beautiful turnkey push-button solution to make all of your L's go away. But I think you will walk away with a good understanding of all the pieces you need to be aware of to be successful, which is good. We're going to talk about sort of the core mechanism of caching all of the virtualized applications and creating what we call a shared cache, being able to leverage that shared cache, how you configure that. We're going to talk about state management in AppV, which is a beautiful thing, and the ability and the uniqueness of state management in a VDI environment, especially a pooled environment. And then we're going to talk very briefly about remote apps, publishing a virtual app as a remote app through RDS, which is pretty interesting. We want to make sure that you walk away with some understanding of how this may help you reduce your costs. There's support costs that are implied here. There are also costs of disk space and things like that. The state piece about how do you make sure that your end users have a good experience by being able to maintain their customizations and being able to move those around so that they can get to them wherever they need to, and then provide quick and seamless access to virtual apps hosted on an RDS environment. And we're going to start with the shared cache piece. And the shared cache piece is the one that I mostly believe is conceptually easy and implementation-wise isn't super simple. How many of you have spent a lot of time down in the expo hall talking to vendors and looking at some of the partners and stuff? There are some really cool solutions being built and delivered by some of our partners. I'm not going to call any of them out by name, but I go check out the hall. Look around at all the folks that are doing AppV-related things or building solutions that work with AppV. There's some neat stuff down there. So this is not a session on VDI, but we would be remiss if we didn't at least talk about it pretty briefly. So VDI, essentially, virtual desktop infrastructure, your corporate desktops, your managed images are being hosted. Your clients are going to access those images through a thin client, through a managed PC, through their own PC. There's lots of different ways they're going to get to it. And you can have a personal virtual desktop environment which essentially gives every end user their own image. And when I attach to grab that image, it can come down, it will store my state. It creates no additional management, but it doesn't really save you a bunch of management. And your disk implication is pretty huge in that environment, right? If you have 1,000 users, each with a personal virtual desktop, that's going to be pretty big. On the pooled side of things, though, you have a couple different implications. You have a single image that you can host for all of your desktops. So all of your corporate customers, for example, can attach to your VDI environment and download that single image. When they close that, when they're done with it, that state does not remain with that image. The next time they launch it, they get a fresh image, right? Because it's all coming from that same store. Easier to manage, a little bit nicer on the disk, but has its own implications. Everything that I read over the past couple years has shown me that the adoption rate of VDI is continuing to get, huge. It's just growing and growing and growing, and more companies are telling us, hey, we're deploying desktops virtually. I listen to Gartner and Forrester and these guys who talk about this personal PC implication. I don't want to give you a Lenovo version blah. I'd rather give you $2,000 and have you go buy your own laptop, and then we'll figure out how to manage the corporate resources to your own virtual laptop. And then I don't have to worry about that hardware piece. That's becoming more and more interesting from what I understand. So shared cache, this is the simple part of the concept. Each image, each machine, each virtual machine has its own cache. My personal desktop, when I was looking at its cache recently, was about 30 gig. So I have 30 gig worth of virtual applications that are sitting on my machine. You multiply that by 1,000, and you get much more than 30 gig. I'm not great at math, but I believe it's a bigger number. So if we can give you a single cache, and all of those virtual desktops share that single cache, that means you don't have, I think the best example is probably Office. This is not a small package. I need Office. It's pretty much what I live in every day. I imagine many of you are in the same boat as I am. So if we have to deliver that to every one of us, that can be pretty heavy. Whereas if each one of us go and execute Office, but we get to launch that virtual off of the same cache, we obviously save ourselves a lot. When we get to the state piece, you'll understand how this implication it's actually pretty positive. Does that make sense? I don't want to oversimplify it. To set this guy up, there's really three main pieces that we need to be aware of. We have to author the shared cache. We have to provision a machine with a cache as if they were a real client. Then we're going to have to provision that cache into a central location that everyone can access to ultimately create the shared cache. And then we have to configure the clients to use the shared cache, and there's some implications in that as well. So I'm not going to do all of this end to end, but I'm going to walk through it a couple times so that you really understand what these different pieces are. If I'm sitting on a desktop, maybe, how many of you are, is anyone in here one who packages applications? So do you use a reference machine to do your packaging? Do you have like a standard box and you go somewhere and create your package? It's pretty common. It's similar when you're building the shared cache. There's going to be like an authoring type machine that you want to use, and you deploy all of the virtual apps that you need in the shared cache to that machine. And then we're going to take that machine offline. We're going to dismount that file system. We're going to grab that shared cache and move it up to a shared location. So that's that first step. The second step is really the copying piece, and then ensuring that the file is up there and available. I'm sorry, the package, the SFT, and all of the good goo that makes up that virtual application. That RTSP comment is sort of important. If you are using HTTP on your client side, this is not a solution for you. This is a solution that's only going to be available through RTSP right now. So that's important to keep in mind. There's a lot of rich metadata that comes from the client to the server over RTSP that we don't get through HTTP, and that's sort of what this triggers off of. The last piece is configuring the client, and this is also very simple. There's 3 core values you need to configure. And we have Microsoft provides an incredible product to help you do the configuration of the client. It's called Notepad, and then you save the file as a .reg file. Works perfect. It's great. So I'm going to show you some of this stuff, and hopefully the demo gods are shining on me today. It is not always the case. I remember I did this a little backwards, so let me jump back real quick. And I'm going to go through it piece by piece just to make sure I drill this first part. The authoring of the cache is a 2-step process. It is publishing the package that's on the authoring machine, and it is loading the package. And then your cache will be available. And I want to show you 2 pieces of this. I want to show you the command line, SFT MIME, and I want to show you the application virtualization client console, which has an implication as well. And I want to make sure I do this on the right machine so that I don't completely destroy my images, which I have been known to do. Don't be surprised. So imagine this is my virtualization machine, or this is my authoring console. Have any of you used SFT MIME to do some of your work? 2, 3, you don't count. 2, I'm sorry, you do count if you're going to answer questions at the end. Great. For those of you who do, that means 2 people. Are you starting to use PowerShell for anything? For any of your work? No?
I'd like to. I hadn't thought about it. I mean,
we don't offer it here. I don't want to set the wrong expectation. I'm just curious if PowerShell's in your future.
it is for other things. But
Yeah.
So if that would be included, that would be
Yeah.
a bonus.
And how many across the room are using PowerShell? It's starting to grow. Every year at TechEd, I see more hands raised, which is great. Essentially, what we're talking about is an interface to do the basic function of app virtualization. This is client-focused. There's not a server on the back end that I'm dependent on. I'm not doing some over-the-network streaming and publishing. This is just a local implication. It's a local machine thing. So I can run SFT MIME, and I can add a package, and I can point to the appropriate metadata, including the SFT and the manifest, and I can add that into the console or into the machine. Once I add that into the machine, I'm going to unload this for a second. Did I say to do that on VM1? I'm going to do that on VM2. If I actually look at an application that's loaded into the machine, I can unload it, and now essentially it's not available to be run. It has to be restreamed. When you add a package, the package doesn't really exist. The system is set up to accept that package when the client goes to execute it. So as an administrator, I can load that and pre-populate the cache. And I can do that with a SFT MIME/load or SFT MIME load and load that up into the cache. And now if I refresh here, I'll see that that thing is loaded 100%. That tells me, as I'm pre-provisioning the environment to share out the cache, that that cache is loaded. That application is fully available in my cache, and now I can move it wherever I need to. I'm choosing Orca XML Notepad just because they're simple and small and they don't take up a lot of space. That's it. Those are the 2 steps. SFT MIME add, SFT MIME load, and your client is done. So the second step of the process is provision the cache. this requires dismounting the FSD. The FSD is essentially the cache. That's the three-letter extension on the cache. In order to dismount, you take the machine down and you, come up in safe mode. Was that sort of Freudian that I choked when I said you take the machine down and come up in safe mode? You come up in safe mode, and now the service is not live. The service is not attached to the cache. You can go grab that FSD, and you can copy it over. I am not going to show you rebooting into safe mode. Hopefully you all can visualize that. If we have time at the end, I can do an interpretive dance and show you what that looks like. Then the second step, this is actually important. You have to look at your management server to make sure the package is there. That's the SFT and all the corresponding files. That's the sort of bulk of that package. It has to be there if I go to the machine to grab what I need. Very important. The last step here is really a recommendation. This isn't so much a requirement, but it is going to save you a lot of headache when you have to update the cache. And I'm going to talk about updating the cache in a little bit. What you do is you create that share on the server, and you make a symbolic link to a name, whatever the name happens to be, app cache. And you populate that with the FSD that you copied from the client machine. And then I'm going to, in the next step, I guess I can do that here. I'm going to configure the client to use that shared cache. Wouldn't it be great if these clickers had laser pointers on them that you could do both things? So if you look about a third of the way down the screen under where it says file name, the recommendation is you point that to a symbolic link instead of a hard-coded path. If you point that to a hard-coded path, when you update that shared cache, you have to go touch every one of your clients in order to update that. If you use a symbolic link, you update the cache, and then you just update the symbolic link, and then the clients know where to go to get it. If you choose to hard-code that path, does anyone have a recommendation on how I can push a registry value out to thousands of machines very quickly? Guy in the back who uses GP preferences? GP preferences, great answer.
PowerShell remoting.
Okay, PowerShell remoting. I'll give you that too. 3 registry values need to be updated there. So let me look at that real quick, and we'll just sort of peruse the environment and talk about these different things. Let's see. Here's my client. And actually, to show you what happened before when I tried to unload the cache on this client and I got an error, that's because I already updated this client to be ready to utilize the shared cache. And one of the things that you do here is you set the client to read-only. The cache on the client is not writable, so it can't make any changes there. The other machine is not set up to use the shared cache yet, so I was able to unload and muck with the cache locally. But when you look at the registry, these are just the 3 values that we were talking about. The first is the file name that points out to that symbolic link. The second is the read-only bit. It says don't muck with the cache. And then the third is the error log location. This is actually very important because in a VDI environment, traditionally what AppV wants to do is it wants to dump the logs in a logical location based on how AppV functions. When you have a shared cache, you don't want all of the clients dumping their logs in the exact same location. It doesn't make so much sense. So from a troubleshooting perspective, you want to make sure that we decouple that log from that shared environment so that you can troubleshoot better and you can reference it per client. So again, super simple conceptually. There's some work there, but with tools like GP preferences and even custom administrative templates with GP, you can touch all of your clients and get those registry values updated pretty quickly. Let's see. What else do we have here? I'm going to switch my view to show hidden files so I can drill down into my program data and look at my my SoftGrid client. There's a lot of stuff in here that we're going to get back to. A lot of your app-specific data when we talk about state is in here. Your package files are the application-specific data. The user data is going to be stored back in, obviously, the profile location. And the stores are out and about. All right, so 3 pieces: author the cache, provision the cache, and then configure the client. Super easy. I want to talk a little bit about updating, because updating the cache is important. I mentioned why the symbolic link is important. Think about it. I have a single cache that all of your AppV clients are using through VDI. And I have this situation where I want to add an application to that cache. I can't do it live because I'm going to put everyone out of commission. What you need to do is you need to replace that cache with a new cache. So I add the extra app offline, I replace the cache, and then the clients are going to start benefiting from the cache offline. But it's the same process we walked through. You just need to make sure that you do it at an appropriate time. One more time, there's the review of what we just went through. Requirements, you want to make sure that you have a low latency environment. That is probably not an AppV requirement. That's more of a VDI requirement. The client will only pick up the updated FSD on reboot. So that's important. And then remember, this is available over RTSP. I'm going to go back so that you can take that picture. Because a picture is worth 1,000 words. I heard that somewhere. I'm not sure where. That was a joke. All right, so step 2. The next thing we wanted to talk about is understanding state management. And again, we've been through this many, many times in our life as IT people, as end users, as consumers. When the application is stored as part of the state, it creates a conflict between me and my wife because she runs an application and completely screws up the configuration, and then I run it and I'm a victim of her configuration, right? I want to separate that state so that we can spend less money on marriage counseling. We want to keep the state away from the app and make sure that user-specific settings are stored by themselves. It's pretty straightforward. The user sees, in an AppV world, a combination of the golden image, that package that came out of the sequencing process, and my customizations. It just looks like one thing. There is data in the application, or I apologize, but that's going to drive me crazy if I don't go and put an E on stat. The application is going to have state that it needs to store, and some applications, depending on how they're developed, user preference type settings are going to be, oh, you are so kind. He brought me a laser pointer. Some applications are going to be coded not quite well, so what you may believe is user state might be stored in the app state, and you're going to have to work with the apps. But most of the apps that we work with, productivity apps, store it well. And the state separation is going to allow the experience where even in a pooled VDI environment, I launch the app and I get my customizations because those customizations or that user state here is going to be stored in potentially my roaming profile. So then when the app goes down, I don't lose my state. And when I refresh that VDI in a pooled environment, I get a fresh golden VDI, but my app runs fine and I get my config because it's stored separately. This is a big end user happy thing. There's only 2 folks here that told me that they have been doing sequencing. So I should take a little bit of time here, and I have to be perfectly honest. Sequencing of AppV is not yet my expertise. I know a lot about it from anecdotally and from talking from other folks. I haven't worked on this at all. But being an old SMS guy, the concepts have not changed in a very long time. I build my reference machine. I run my sequencer. this in the sequencer, I tell it what app I want to run. It installs that app while it's monitoring the system. It creates all of those dependencies and tells you what it needs to be able to store together to create your virtual package, and then it sort of dumps an artifact out of the back end that you get to use as your package, right? So it's sort of a monitoring type solution. What comes out of the back end of the sequencing process is what we sometimes refer to as the golden image. That image does not change. Customizations are going to be applied to users and computers and whatever differently. If you need to change that golden image, you essentially go back to the sequencer and create a new version, and you have a new golden image. So one of the things to keep in mind is during that sequencing process, all of the content required and captured during the install is in there. All the classifications of the files, DLLs and config files like ini files and whatever are all going to be captured in there. You're going to deploy that golden image to the client, and again, it's read-only. You're not going to make changes to that package. User states saved in profile-specific locations. That is, user-specific locations under users, Kevin, app data, blah, blah, blah. And you'll see all the files down there. And the interesting thing about AppV is going to have separate state for not only all of the individuals, but also the system account and other corresponding accounts that may access the apps will have their own config for those apps. This is what it looks like on the left-hand side. The left-hand side of that screen, that's all the user data, right? So under program data, or under users, user app data, local, whatever. The top, you see the package named directory there. I don't want to shoot myself in the eye. So that guy there, that is going to be the file that is active while the application is running. That's going to store all of the config data, the customization data, while the app is running. That is going to go away when the app is closed. Now, what happens is all the data in that TMP file gets merged into that PKG file. The PKG file is the state file that gets stored with your customizations for the long term. That's why it's in the roaming locations, because if you choose to use roaming profiles, it doesn't matter where I am, I go and get my VDI, I launch my app, and suddenly all my customizations are available to me. How many of you use roaming profiles? How many folks are happy with roaming profiles? Nice. Solves a good purpose. It's not always the easiest thing to troubleshoot. On the left-hand side, this is all, or is that right? On the right-hand side, that's all the public data. That's all the package data. Those PKG files that I opened up, and that's not going to roam. Yeah.
We've seen some issues with trying to reset that, only specifically within Office. Is that because of the AppV deployment kit for Office in terms of some of the customizations, typically like for Word, normal dot, and the cat for the quick access toolbar? It seems a little bit different. I mean, Office is the only app we've had an issue with, where it seems AppV stores things in a different way.
So let me try to repeat the question. I think what you said was you've tried to reset the config to the golden image, and for Office you get a different experience that you do for these other apps. I'm not aware of that issue, but I would love to talk about it more. I think you're probably onto the right track. There's probably offices looking for different file types that we're not getting in there. I have to say, though, they are one of our biggest, if not biggest, partners, and making that experience perfect in AppV is a big tenet for our team. So I'd love to hear more about it, and to bribe you to tell me more about it, I'll give you a 4 gig USB charger phone, really geeky device that you can play with. All of you could be as cool as him, I'm telling you. I have 3 more. I don't know if I'm actually going to give them out if I really answer your question. It's just if I don't answer your question like I did with him, I'll give you no, I'm just kidding. All right, state management walkthrough. Of course, this is just the life cycle, and I just want to show you quickly what the state looks like. And this is exactly in line with what this gentleman just asked in his question. But you add your package to the machine. That's the publishing experience. In a full AppV environment, the AppV client goes to the server and says, hey, what do I need? And the AppV server says, oh, you need this. I'm going to publish it to you. The client publishes that. There's nothing in the cache. Publishing, just like a lot of other different solutions, means there's a shortcut or there's a file type association or there's some type of mechanism for an end user to execute on that application that was just published. So they click on that executable, and then our streaming component kicks in and starts pulling that data down in a very logical way. We pull down only the bits required to launch the app first, so we get it up and running quickly, and then pull down the bits in what we call other feature blocks behind it. The primary feature block is really all you need to launch this application. So then you have it loaded in the cache. You have to be careful if you're building that shared cache, because if you're streaming, that primary feature block is not loading 100% of the app. So you need to force the load so that you get the whole thing in the cache. But then we'll run it. And that's where the state piece comes in. And I'm just going to give you a real quick walkthrough of what that looks like. And I may or may not be doing this on the right machine, but I'll find out soon enough. I'm going to use Orca. Orca is, I'm going to use Orca on this machine. Orca is, any of you all use Orca? It's a pretty cool tool, but it's a tool that allows you to see inside an MSI, and you can make customizations in there. And it's been around for a while. So anyway, I'm going to go do things with Orca that I would typically never do. I'm going to change the background to green, because the guy on my team who uses Orca hates green, and that should drive him sufficiently crazy. So I'm closing it down. All of that state is stored. It's in my PKG file. If you notice this little guy, the status on the lower right, that's configurable. It shows when it's coming up and going down. But just to show you that that state is persistent, I'm going to launch Orca, and I see that there's some green in there, and I can make some changes to the size, and I can possibly change some other properties and whatever. So all of that user customization stuff is stored. If I were to go into my management client and say, and the typical scenario here is you call me up and you say, hey, this application is broken. And I start going through this troubleshooting process with you, and we try to figure out what is broken about it. And I'm talking to Ben, and he says, oh, it works fine for me. And I talk to you, oh, it works fine for me. Oh, it works fine for me. I come to the conclusion that there's probably something in your profile. Let me get you back to a golden image and see if that takes care of it. So I'm just going to unload. Actually, I am going to repair that application. I get that. An old friend of mine named Bill Boswell used to tell me that if a dialog box had more than 3 lines, you should click OK as quick as possible, because what you read is probably not going to be all that helpful. This one actually is, though. This is, hey, if you click this, you're losing all of your state, which is good to know. Maybe the last time I ever read that. So if I launch Orca now, this size is the same. All of my customizations are gone or whatever. And again, just to be clear, you launch the app, you change your config, it stores it in this TMP file that is local to your profile. You close the app, it takes the data in that TMP file and puts it into a PKG file that's in the roaming portion of your profile. So that way your customizations will follow you. When I went and repaired, it said wipe out all that customization goo and start with a clean image. And then I go back to the SFT and the original image, and that's what you get. Make sense? Again, pretty straight ahead. Oh. I flipped it upside down. I was going backwards. All right, once again, add the package. There's no user state. Load the package. It creates the TMP file. And once you run the package, it creates the PKG file. And then when you close the package, the TMP gets merged in, and that's where it goes. So the last thing that I want to spend a few minutes on is talking about Remote App and AppV. How many of you use Remote App? Or any other vendor's solution that's similar to this? Yeah, Citrix has been doing this for a long time, and there's some great stuff out there. There's a funky thing here with app virtualization because we think of application virtualization as something that happens on my client. But when I execute a remote app, the server is really functioning as the client, right? I don't launch anything local. I need to publish a shortcut to the remote app on this machine. When I launch it, all of the processing happens out on the server. So I need to treat that server as a client, and I need to publish an application as a virtual app as a remote app on that remote desktop server. And then I need to, I don't need to, but then I can benefit from the value of the shared cache. So I have the remote desktop server configured to utilize the shared cache just like any other client. So now we all launch this remote app. It all executes on the server, and it's a beautiful, brilliant thing. So let's, here's another implication. I'm going to show you this in just a second. When I launch the remote application manager and I try to create an application, it's not your traditional experience. There's this command line execution to launch applications in the AppV world called a SFT tray. And I have to publish that, and it has some implications to it. But it's not just, and you also don't want every application you publish as a remote app to have that AppV icon. You want to customize it so it has appropriate, look and feel, does the right thing for your end users. Was that a stretch or a question?
No.
You sure?
Yep.
I've got 3 more of those cool things. Anyway, I don't know how many of you have followed sort of the strategic thinking of our division. We're part of what's called the Management and Security Division at Microsoft. We're part of the server and tools business. And we've been talking a lot for a lot of years, about something that we call user-centric computing. And if you're in the system center world, you've probably heard a bit about this. Some of the things that I'm showing you here are actually pieces of the puzzle that are coming together to help people get to this really user-centric environment. And think of it this way. This is sort of, think of the future. This guy in the front row is using a very skinny device and a very odd thing. It seems to have some fruit on the bottom of it. I'm not sure what that thing really is, but I want to see a world where he has whatever device he wants, and he clicks on that application, and the world that manages him does some policy analysis on what he's doing. Oh, you're on this type of device. Oh, you're on a wireless network. Oh, you're this type of security profile or blah. Do some analysis on that and say, I want to deliver you the best experience for you, right? I'm in my hotel room. I'm on a slow network. I go and launch an application that I don't have published. It says, you know what? I'm not going to push 4 gig of goo through the pipe so that you can run, World of Warcraft. We don't do that virtually, do we? Do we publish that in our environment? No. I'm not going to push that through the pipe at you, but I have it available as a remote app, and let me redirect you to this remote app server, and we can let you run the app and get some experience there. And that type of dynamic experience where the computing power really embraces your state, the user's state, and gives you what you need when you need it is really pretty interesting. And we're getting there. And I've only been a part of this company for 5 years, and the progress that we've made is pretty staggering, even though you don't always see it all. Anyway, we're going to publish the app. We're going to create the remote app. Keep flipping this upside down, and then we'll deploy the remote app. Let me show you quickly what this looks like. I guess this is the right server. So I'm going to launch Server Manager. You all familiar with Server Manager? Yes, we're all familiar with Server Manager. This is my RDS server. And let me get rid of this guy over here. And I want to add a remote app. And it launches my remote app add app thingy wizard. And we all love wizards. And I want to go find Orca. And I notice that Orca's not there. So what I'm going to do is what I just described. I'm going to go and browse. And I'm going to browse out to Program Files, Microsoft Application Virtualization Client, SFT Tray. And I'm going to look at the properties of that, and I need to define the icons, and I need to define the behavior, and I need to define all of this stuff to make SFT Tray work. And that's a colossal pain, especially if you have 1,000 applications, virtual apps. Anyone have 1,000 virtual applications? You do? How many more? 10 more? Just kidding. 1 and 2? Anyone in that same size range? How many of you who are using AppV have between 100 and 200 virtual applications? And how many have less than 100? All right. Good info. So this is easier. I'm going to show you a better way to do it. I'm going to cancel out of all of this stuff. And I'm going to go over to my AppV client. Because remember, I'm not just the Hair Club professional, I'm also a client. There's Orca, published to this machine as a virtual application. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish a new shortcut to Orca. And I'm going to go and make sure that I put this shortcut in the right location. And that location is going to be C. Oh, wait, we did this morning, didn't we? C. Program Files. No. How about I show hidden files and folders and drives? And then I browse and find C program data. That looks helpful. And then Microsoft or Windows, and then Start Menu. I'll just publish this guy to the Start Menu, and I'll give it a path, a separate directory, so that they're easier to organize and easier to find. Actually, I'm going to copy that in case I need it later. That was not copy. That was not copy. I have a complaint about the keyboard. I'm just kidding. Where the Start button is supposed to be a Control button. Control key, we sometimes call it. Windows, Start Menu, OK. Remote App. Control C, that worked. Control C, in case you guys didn't know, it copies what you have selected. Then you can hit Control V. All right, so now I have that published, that shortcut is published to the Start Menu that's available to the whole system. So now when I go into my Remote App Manager, Orca is there and ready to be published. The experience is irrelevant. From you can demo it all you want, but it looks exactly like you would expect. You double-click on the shortcut, and it launches the application. The processing power is, of course, all on the back end. Yeah. Is there a way to stop the tray to show the initialization status as it's launching? Because honestly, I don't want my end users to know anything's different. And that little thing pops up, and suddenly people who get distracted by shiny objects call the help desk, and we want to avoid that. That's a great question. Yes, there is. It's a config item in the client. I don't know that I'm going to be able to find it right this moment, but it is there. Do you know off the top of your head where it is? Yeah, it's easy, and I can point you to it afterwards. I just want to make sure the behavior is that when you launch a virtual app, that little pop-up doesn't come up and say, hey, a virtual app is launching. And then when you close it, it says, hey, a virtual app is closing. Makes sense. From a diagnostic perspective, it's sort of nice to see because you can use that sort of visually to help you troubleshoot. Yes? That's right.
Are there any issues that we have from either having all that stuff in a cache that I technically have access to? Is there any way that I could run an app that I'm not supposed to get? How do we manage that in an environment where not everybody gets everything that I want to publish with that?
That is a great question. And licensing is something that's near and dear to my heart, and how we do it and what we do with it is something that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about. And luckily, my job changed last week, so I get to think about something different now, which is going to be fun. But licensing, I'll use compliance instead of licensing, because it's not the responsibility of AppV to figure out what Adobe's license end user agreement is like, or what, ISV blah. But the need is real. I have 1,000 people hitting a single image. I have a single cache that has applications for all 1,000 people. I only have AppFoo licensed for 25 people. All of that is managed through our management console, through permissioning and the publishing experience. So when that end user launches their virtual application and the AppV client within that virtual app goes and talks to the publishing server and says, hey, what do I get? It gives me what's called an app list that tells me what's available to me and then points me to the shared cache to go get that package. So we manage who can get access to what packages through the management experience. You get a similar experience if you're using SCCM or other ESDs or homegrown things. But it's all about making sure that the people who are supposed to get the app are entitled to that app through permissioning. That's a great question, though. I have to say, I believe this will be the fourth and last. I believe that this will be the fourth and last cool USB key. So you better be good. Yeah, you. You that's pointing to yourself. Yeah.
Is that program data folder configurable to go on like the data drive instead of the root drive?
Is the program data? That program data is a Windows artifact. That's not an AppV artifact, right?
But if that's not the name of the folder, but for caching, if you don't have the shared cache, if you want a terminal server environment, if you want to have all the caches on the data drive.
Right. Sorry, that was a bad toss. I believe, and I can confirm this for you, but I believe we use an incredibly geeky term service called the MUPR service, the Multi-Universal Naming Convention Provider, that points to a local drive letter. So I think you just have to have a mapped drive. You have to have a disk that appears local to the OS, and I think you can offload it there. But I can confirm that for you. I don't know. Sound good? Typically
our terminal servers have a C system drive.
And then a D.
Data drive that either you install the app or whatever. That's where I want to put all these caches.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misinterpreted your question. You can absolutely do that. You can put the FSD anywhere you want as long as it's attachable from that terminal server. It's a NAS or separate attached storage. The client configuration points to that symbolic link, and it just knows how to get to where it's going. Yeah, that's fine. Did you have a question? Someone over here? Yeah.
Best practice or tools we can use, like in my organization, we're very distributed with lots of Citrix servers in each branch location. And so for us to kind of set this up and provision, set up a cache on 35 sites is pretty time consuming, especially when we need to do updates.
Right.
Anything down the pipeline or anything you could recommend to help speed up that process?
You can probably predict my answer, but DFS, any other sort of disk replication technology that you're working with. I have 35 sites. I want that same cache to be available on those sites. I think there's technology available to do that. I know I personally have seen DFS evolve to something that's way more reliable now and functional than it was 10 years ago, or than FRS was, but your mileage may vary.
Is there any compression that takes place when you're actually doing app-based? Is there any compression as far as the transfer of speeding up the data?
During the sequencing and the streaming? I don't believe so. Ben, is there the question? Sorry, thank you. The question was, is there any compression of the packages in AppV so that when you're doing streaming, you sort of save your network, or even from a sequencing perspective? And I'm not sure. There is on the streaming side of things? Yeah, so okay, on the streaming side, there is some compression that's being used there.
With the shared cache being read-only, are there implications there as far as streaming for updates? Am I no longer essentially using streaming as an update mechanism for everybody's shared cache?
What was that?
Oh, it becomes a static process.
Yeah, but I think the question is more, since I have that read-only cache, and remember, when I encountered that error, I had read-only bits set on the local cache. I need to update that cache that everyone's using, and that's going to be a process that's going to need some coordination.
It's kind of a way to update. I'm forcing myself forward to update the shared cache.
Yeah, here's my biggest concern. You have to plan it, right? You have to not think, oh, some manager, some executive X says, I want app food distributed today. You need to be pretty hardcore that says, these are our shared cache update windows. We're going to do that the second Tuesday of the month or whatever, and pull those things together. If you get in the habit of trying to do it all the time, you're going to get some unhappy customers, I believe. And you're going to be unhappy because I think it'll be a lot of work. Yeah, like I said, simple in concept, implementation is not super easy. It's a lot of work on your side to make it happen.
Are there any performance gotchas when you're actually doing AppV and RDS?
Not related to AppV. So you have your performance implications that you're probably familiar with in your terminal environment or in your VDI environment. AppV is not adding a big additional process there. As far as a resource constraint, your disk could get big, so you need to be aware of the value of the shared cache so that you can benefit from that. Any more questions? Yeah. Well,
So normally in our environment, like we'll be sequencing the applications twice a week and updating applications almost on a daily basis. So going with this shared cache thing, like can we automate to reboot the not to reboot the machine to safe mode, but to stop only few specific services and script it to copy it to the shared to whatever the storage is and do that using some
so that's why I think the simplicity of this is interesting, because I would say you absolutely have every piece, every question that you need to answer, and you should be able to script it and automate it. But I need to ask you a question. Why are you updating applications every day? And are you publishing those? Is your change control process to your end users a daily process? Okay. Okay. That makes sense. So I believe, because I know I can answer every one of these questions, that I can script it. I don't know that it would be a very pretty script, and I don't know that it would be super efficient. But when you leave the office at if you work like we do at 2 o'clock in the morning, you execute that script, and when you come back at a reasonable hour, like I think 2 is usually when developers start coming into the office, it should be done. I'm kidding, but you should be able to automate the whole process. It's not perfect, and I like that feedback, because I think as we sort of think about our future, those are the types of scenarios that I want to learn more about. Is it recommended to use? Well, that was my first question. If what you said, I'm updating these packages every day, I would be concerned that you're making good choices in your production environment. But I'm sure there are customers who have to do that. I mean, I know that there are line of business applications that are run throughout healthcare and finance or whatever that have a constant change process. It just seems like a lot of overhead. I think change management, change and configure management, you want to keep the churn on your end user low. I think that's probably a best practice.
We do our sequencing, or more importantly, the installing on a virtual machine. Can we just simply shut down
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. It sounds reasonable. You mean mount the VHD somewhere else that I can actually munch through it? It sounds reasonable, but I would have to test it before I gave you an authoritative answer. I've done that before. I have images that are VHDs, and I've mounted them and gone through and pulled stuff out of them, so it might work. Anyway, shoot me your email, or we'll get in touch, and maybe I can help you figure that out.
Future releases of a packager, will you be able to update the original golden image instead of having every time you want to make a small change, it'll save the whole file as version 2 without having to script OSD files and copy everything to the user package environment instead of the golden environment. For example, a building professional, a gig and a half packager, and if you want to copy one API file for XYZ application that's on your server, if you do file save, even though the file is 20K, it's going to create another 1.5 gig file, which then you would have to copy across all your environments.
Right. So the question was related to creating multiple versions of virtual applications, and the situation today, you run the sequencer, you load up the package, and you make your change, and you create a new package, essentially. It contains a lineage so that version history is stored. You know where it came from. But it is a lot of overhead, and there seems to be a theoretical, simpler way to do it. I just want this DLL added, and just shove it in, and then it's good, right? Create V2 and some metadata. We just released or announced the new sequencer that came with SP1 of AppV 4.6 for 4.6 clients. That has not done anything to address that situation. It did add a very interesting feature that's a little unrelated called package accelerators that gets you started in building the packages. It's good feedback. I don't have knowledge on what our plans are for the next sequencer. And if I did, I probably wouldn't tell you anyway. But we just released one, and we'll be planning.
Yeah, because what happens is if we have a 10 meg update, you script it inside of the OSD file, but then now the user file is growing and growing.
Yep. Oh, let me get version 2. That's 10 more gig of data. Yep, I get it. Good feedback.
Is there any better way to manage user file type association preferences? Because one of the things we're running into in virtual IP Office is some users want that experience where when they open up the .doc, when they hit a .docx file, it's going to launch Word and give them that environment. Other people don't want that to happen. We're using the management server, and so those things keep reasserting themselves, once they log in and hit the publishing server. Any solutions you can think of, or perhaps fixes coming down the road that can help
Right.
address that?
So the question is about publishing shortcuts and file type associations and different things, because some users, actually the scenario that I typically use is I have a single package, and any salespeople in the room? So I have a bunch of salespeople who really don't know how to do anything but turn on their computer, and I need the shortcut for Excel to be on their desktop, and it needs to blink, right? Because they're going to be on the road, and they're going to be like, oh, the internet's broken. Someone fix my computer. I'm just kidding. I love sales guys. But their experience and how that FTA is presented to them is very different than how I want it presented to my development environment or my lawyers who are equally as savvy at computer technology as, sorry, any lawyers in the room? So that kind of customization we think a lot about. And I know the experience in the 4.5 management server for AppV very well. I can't say that I always think it's the best experience. And that scenario is key to how we're going to start managing customizations that's managed by the admin in the future. I don't know what the future means. I can't make any commitments to it, but I can tell you that that's a really important scenario for us, and we spend a lot of time thinking about it. So. Going. I don't know what this slide says. I'm sort of off track. So remote app, publish the app to the machine, preload the app. I can take that shortcut out of and publish the app to the start menu, so I make it public so the remote app manager can see it, and I can publish it, and it's pretty easy. So we talked about the shared cache. We talked about managing the state. We talked about deploying the remote apps. Hopefully we got through the core discussions. Like I said, Derek, who abandoned us because I imagine he had something better to do, did a session on server at V today. Check it out on the recordings if you get a chance. It was really great. Alvin Chardon, he's a test architect in our organization, brilliant guy, did a discussion of the sequencer if you didn't see it. I imagine that went very well. And then tomorrow, the illustrious Ben is going to do a presentation on planning for optimal app V, management, server performance, and scalability. And that's a don't miss session. Must see. We're going to all be down at the booth. There's an application virtualization booth, and there's stuffed animals of different farm types and prairie type animals throughout the day. So come and get your kids something fun. Go to TechNet. I personally am going to try to push an agenda that we start tweeting more, we start using Facebook more, we start really leveraging our community and building that so that you can get content, more seamlessly. And check us out, because I think you'll see some changes over the next year. I think you've probably seen some of these slides a million times. Go to all of these resources, run My Tech Ed on your mobile phone. Everyone I've talked to seems to think it's a great experience.
I didn't see the deck out of the session.
That might be because I gave it to these guys like an hour ago.
Okay.
I'm not sure. It will be published. It'll get up there. It just may take a few hours. Sorry about that. I would love to share with all of you the great story of preparing for this over the past few days. Fill out your evals and win a Connect. And soon, Skype will be part of your Connect experience. That's what I read in the papers. So thank you all for coming. It was a great chat. If you have any questions, come on by or come down to the booth and take care.